Hi, everybody. Welcome back to part two, Stefanie Drysdale's special cybersecurity recap for Friday, July 23rd, 2021. We're speaking with author Spencer Coursen about his book, The Safety Track. Ms. Stefanie, welcome back.
Thank you, Chuck. So, Spencer, this is a good time to take the whole bring in our positive energy into a situation. But I think in certain situations, this is probably a harder thing for women in general. And sometimes when we teach our kids a certain way as well. But I think we can all fall into it. How do we know when that positive energy and that kindness and that sweetness that we bring into a situation can actually work against us and put us in a bad situation? How do we know when to adjust the positive politeness into a boundary setting?
Well, and I think that's such an important point. And I'm really very proud of how that chapter, the being too polite chapter in the book, turned out, because it's one of the chapters that has resonated most with the readers. And you're right. While we want to promote a positive protective posture when we're out and about, and while we want to, understand the emotional state of our fellow citizens, we also want to make sure that we're not, while we're being polite, that we're not being too polite. And that starts with boundaries, because I think a lot of people sometimes think that boundaries are what we want to put around other people, when in reality, boundaries are what we establish for ourselves. Boundaries are kind of like the fence around our home, except that we have certain things that we're willing to accept and not accept around us. And so while, we always want to do things that we want to do, what we don't want to do is give someone else a yes when it's really a no to us, to ourselves. And so that's not about being mean. That's not about being selfish. It is sometimes about being disagreeable, but being disagreeable is just about having a healthy back and forth. It's kind of like when you're having a debate. It's not that you necessarily think that the other person is a bad person because you don't like their opinion. You're just surrounding yourselves with intelligent people who disagree with you. And so when we are out in the world promoting who we are and our aspects and our protective posture that will follow us, it's important to not allow that concept of being too polite to get in the way of our own protection. Because while being polite is a courtesy, protecting ourselves is a priority. And so our willingness to defend ourselves should always be greater than our unwillingness to offend another. And the more that we are willing to, I always say participate in our own protection, but just sort of keep our own posture protected, the better we will be at avoiding those circumstances, which down the line may lead us into a situation which we will not be able to get ourselves out of as effectively as we may have thought we could.
Yeah, it's a great way to look at that. I think that sometimes there's a concern that the boundary setting will create an escalation, right? Or will prompt an escalation. And to be able to do that in a way that, as you said, does not necessarily infringe upon someone else's boundaries, but just sets our own, I think is a really important lesson, obviously for our own safety, but just as a human, right, to do that, but definitely for safety.
Right. Because, and I think what most people don't realize is that while someone in the moment might get flustered that you're being so assertive as to where your boundaries lie, in the long run, they'll actually respect you more for doing so. Because what you see with a lot of people with nefarious intent is that they probe how disagreeable you're willing to be. I used one of those examples in the that Bombshell movie where the Roger Ailes character is trying to sexually harass the Margot Robbie character, and she wants to do a screen test, and he's like, well, give me a twirl. And she knows it's wrong, but she still agrees to do it. And all he's doing is just testing her willingness to be disagreeable. Well, I want to see a little more of your legs. It is a visual medium. And had she just at the very beginning just said, no, you're crossing a boundary, which I have for myself, which the Megyn Kelly character did in that movie, the more that we can set those parameters and those guidelines and those boundaries for how others treat us, the better those people will ultimately, or the more those people will ultimately respect us for having those boundaries in place.
And let's hope so. I think some people are just the people they are, and in no way would we victim blame in the point that someone feels coerced into doing something, right? But it is important that we have that permission to set those boundaries, and that we have the space and sometimes the necessity of having allies handy to make sure that we can do that safely, and not fear the repercussions of setting a personal boundary.
Yeah, but I also think it's very important for everyone to understand that I remember when I was in a dive class and one of the instructors was like, hey, listen, when you start running out of air, don't panic. You can hold your breath for a full minute longer than you think you can. And I think a lot of people can take that same application into their everyday life. When you're in an unfavorable circumstance, remember that you have more reserve in your tank than you think you might. You are stronger than you think, and you are smarter than you know. You just have to be willing to have the willingness to employ that extra courage you have within you. And the more that courage is a muscle, and the more we use it, the stronger we get. But the more we avoid the employment of those options, the more they will atrophy, and the more they will deteriorate over time. So being polite, but not being too polite, is sometimes a fine line to walk. But the more you do it, the better you will be at the actual doing.
No, it's an important lesson, and absolutely reading it in your book as well as just living it, I think gives someone the agency to make that that step in that direction, and make sure that they're making decisions that are for their own benefit and safety, and they are placed as a priority.
Yeah, and I think there's nothing wrong with you if you think that you will ever find yourself in a predicament that you are not sure how or what you would do to get out of, to just rehearse those things with a friend, to audit yourself with honesty, to give yourself, the tools in your kit that you know how to use them. Like, you don't want your first time using a fire extinguisher to be an actual trial by fire. You don't want your first time using, stepping up, walking up to an elevator and seeing a creepy guy inside to be the first time like, oh, you know what? I forgot my keys. Like, just get into the practice of every so often deciding that when the elevator door opens, you're not going to get on, so that you get into that pattern in practice, so that it becomes a part of your muscle memory. It becomes part of your innate DNA. I mean, there's an old quote in Ranger School where they say in combat, a man's brains turns to water and runs out his ears, and he relies on pure instinct alone. But if you haven't honed those instincts and those traits and those practices and those strategies over time, you cannot expect them to come into play when you need them the most. So, audit yourself with honesty. What are the most realistic risks you are most likely to face? Then take a look at what are the best safeguards you can put in place to keep those risks from becoming a reality. Because the more, one of those things I talk about, awareness plus preparation equals safety. And the more we are willing to participate in our own protection, the more certain of our safety we can all be.
Absolutely. You mentioned in your book a quote that I think was definitely coined by Gavin de Becker in The Gift of Fear. And the gift of fear is such a great gift, right? That gut feeling we all have that says, hey, this seems off. This seems like something I need to pay attention to, or maybe, to your point, not get on the elevator, or make adjustments to. So I think it's a great reference. Well, I thank you so much for joining us. This was so much fun. I know that we could just talk forever and ever, but it's always a pleasure. And this is in a format that I think is super convenient, super digestible, and such an easy read. So thank you so much for putting the time and the effort into it.
My absolute pleasure, Stephanie. Thank you so much for having me. And Chuck, thank you for having me as well.